Before anything else, pause for a moment and think about this carefully. Imagine a man who would go on to influence centuries of thought, shaping philosophy, education, politics, and even the way we question reality itself. And yet, he left behind nothing written. No books, no recorded teachings in his own words, no direct explanation of his ideas. Everything we know about him comes from others, students, admirers, critics, and even those who mocked him. That alone creates a problem, because what we are dealing with is not a single clear figure, but a fragmented image, reconstructed through different perspectives. Some portray him as a moral guide, others as an irritant, some as a genius, others as a threat. And somewhere between all those versions lies Socrates, the man who would be condemned to death not for what he did, but for what he made people realize. To truly understand Socrates, you need to go back even further, to a time before his influence reshaped philosophy. In early Greek thought, philosophy was not about ethics, morality, or human behavior. It was about the structure of reality itself. Thinkers like Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Democritus were trying to answer what, at the time, were the biggest questions imaginable. What is the universe made of? Is there a single fundamental substance behind everything, or many? Is reality stable, or is everything constantly changing? Heraclitus famously argued that everything flows, that change is the only constant. Parmenides, on the other hand, insisted that change is an illusion and that reality is fixed and unchanging. These debates may seem abstract, but they represent humanity's first serious attempt to understand the world through reason instead of mythology. And then Socrates appears and redirects everything. Instead of looking outward toward the cosmos, he turns inward toward human life. He shifts the entire focus of philosophy from nature to ethics. Instead of asking what the world is made of, he asks what a human being should be. What is justice, not in theory, but in practice? What is courage, not in battle, but in everyday life? What is virtue, and can it be taught? These questions sound simple at first, but they are not, because once you begin to answer them, you realize how difficult it is to define them clearly. Socrates developed a method to deal with that difficulty. Today, we call it the Socratic method, or elenchs. It wasn't about teaching in the traditional sense, it was about dialogue, structured, persistent questioning that forced the other person to examine their own beliefs. He would start with a simple question. The other person would respond with confidence. Then Socrates would ask for clarification, then for consistency, then for examples. Slowly, carefully, he would expose contradictions in their thinking, not by attacking them, but by guiding them to see the flaws themselves. And that process often led to a moment of realization where the person understood that they didn't actually know what they thought they knew. This connects directly to one of his central philosophical ideas, that true wisdom lies in recognizing one's own ignorance. When Socrates said, "I know that I know nothing," he wasn't being modest, he was making a precise point. Most people live under the illusion of knowledge. They hold strong opinions on justice, morality, politics, and life, but cannot explain or defend those ideas under scrutiny. Socrates believed that this false sense of knowledge was more dangerous than ignorance itself, because when you think you know something, you stop questioning, and when you stop questioning, you stop learning. This approach made him influential, but deeply controversial. Socrates did not operate in private. He questioned people publicly, often in the streets of Athens where others could watch. Politicians, poets, craftsmen, intellectuals, no one was exempt. And when their reasoning collapsed under questioning, it wasn't just a private failure, it became a public one. Over time, this created resentment, not because Socrates insulted people directly, but because he exposed something they couldn't defend themselves against, their own lack of understanding. At the same time, Athens itself was undergoing serious instability.
The Peloponnesian War had just ended, leaving the city weakened both politically and socially. There had been periods of oligarchic rule, internal conflict, and a fragile restoration of democracy. Trust in institutions was low. The society was tense, uncertain, and sensitive to disruption. In that kind of environment, a man who constantly questioned authority, tradition, and belief systems could easily be seen not as a philosopher, but as a destabilizing force. And then came the trial. In 399 BC, Socrates was formally accused by three individuals: Mileto, who represented the poets; Anytus, a powerful politician and craftsman; and Lycon, associated with the rhetoricians. The charges were twofold. First, impiety, meaning he did not properly acknowledge the gods of Athens and introduced new spiritual ideas. Second, corrupting the youth, suggesting that his influence led young people to question authority and reject traditional values. To modern ears, these accusations may seem vague or even weak, but in ancient Athens, they carried real weight. Religion was not separate from public life. It was deeply tied to civic identity and social order. To question the gods or to encourage others to question authority could be interpreted as a threat to the stability of the city itself. And the trial was conducted before a large jury of citizens, over 500 men. There was no judge in the modern sense. The jurors would listen to both sides and then vote. Socrates was given the opportunity to defend himself, and what followed, recorded by Plato in the Apology, is one of the most remarkable defenses in history. Socrates did not attempt to manipulate emotions. He did not present himself as a victim. Instead, he stayed consistent with his philosophy. He argued that he never claimed to be a teacher in the conventional sense, and that he never charged money for his conversations, unlike the sophists of his time. He explained that his actions were guided by a kind of moral mission, to challenge people, to expose false wisdom, and to encourage a deeper search for truth. He directly challenged his accusers, particularly Mileto, questioning the logic of the charges. If Socrates was corrupting the youth, was he doing so intentionally or unintentionally? If intentionally, why would he harm the society he lived in? And if unintentionally, then he should be educated, not punished. Through this line of questioning, he demonstrated the weakness of the accusations themselves. He also addressed the fear of death, one of the central emotional pressures of the trial. Socrates argued that fearing death is irrational because it assumes knowledge we do not possess. No one knows what happens after death. It could be a peaceful state, like a dreamless sleep, or a continuation of the soul's journey. Therefore, to fear it is to pretend to know something we do not know, once again, a form of false wisdom. Despite the strength of his arguments, the jury found him guilty. The vote was relatively close, which suggests that opinion in Athens was divided, but the decision was final. According to Athenian law, after a guilty verdict, both the prosecution and the defendant could propose a punishment, and the jury would choose between them. This was Socrates' final opportunity to save himself, and this is where his behavior becomes even more striking. Instead of proposing exile or a reduced sentence, Socrates suggested that he deserved to be rewarded, to be given free meals for life, an honor reserved for Olympic victors. From his perspective, this was logical. He believed he had benefited Athens by encouraging critical thinking. But to the jury, this came across as arrogance. It likely sealed his fate. The final sentence was death. Even then, escape was possible. His friends arranged everything. The guards could be bribed. He could leave Athens and live somewhere else. Many expected him to accept, but Socrates refused, and his reasoning reveals one of the most consistent aspects of his philosophy. He believed one must respect the laws of the society they live in. For Socrates, it was better to suffer injustice than to commit it. His final moments, described in Plato's Phaedo, reflect an almost unsettling calm. Surrounded by his friends, he continued to discuss philosophical ideas, particularly the nature of the soul and what happens after death. There was no panic, no attempt to delay the inevitable. When the time came, he drank the poison, hemlock, and gradually lost control of his body. His final words referenced a debt owed, possibly symbolizing a final act of closure, though their exact meaning remains debated. And that ambiguity is fitting, because Socrates was never about providing clear answers. His entire life was built around questioning, challenging assumptions, exposing contradictions, and forcing people to confront their own beliefs. His death did not end that process. If anything, it amplified it. Even today, the story of Socrates raises questions that remain unresolved. Was he executed because he was dangerous, or because he revealed something dangerous about others? Was he a defender of truth, or a critic of the very system that judged him? And perhaps most importantly,
how much questioning can a society tolerate before it begins to see it as a threat? Because in the end, Socrates didn't just challenge individuals, he challenged certainty itself. And that is something that never stops being relevant. So now the question is no longer just about who Socrates was. It becomes something more direct. If someone were to question your beliefs, your understanding of truth, your sense of right and wrong, would your answers hold up? Or would they begin to collapse, one question at a time?